This film is divided into 3 parts, where the story actually tells about the dark side of 3 kingdoms that are all acquainted with one another. But to keep things from jumping around, we'll separate it into 3 storylines so you can enjoy them more easily. Now, the very first story begins in a magnificent kingdom called Longtrellis, where the benevolent king and the gracious queen who majestically rule this prosperous kingdom appear to be a truly and wonderfully happy couple. But what not everyone knew was that the queen actually suffered from an illness that made her unable to have a child. Seeing his wife always sad, the king tried to cheer her up by doing all sorts of things, including inviting circus clowns into the palace. Unfortunately, during the performance, the queen found out that one of the clowns was actually pregnant, which made her feel envious and even sadder. When the king found out, he went to her room and apologized for what had happened earlier. The king also promised that he would do whatever it takes to solve this problem. Then, in the middle of the night, a mysterious man arrived at the palace and asked to meet with the king and queen. When they met, the man said that he could solve the queen's infertility problem. Upon hearing this, the king reminded him that many people had previously tried to offer advice or ideas. But since they all failed, they were eventually sentenced to death. But after hearing this, the man was not intimidated at all. He was even very confident that the queen could have a baby. But it all depended on how great a sacrifice the king was willing to make. Because if they wanted a new life, then death must also occur, so that balance could be achieved. Then, the man explained the process. The king had to sacrifice his own precious life to catch a fearsome sea monster, and once it was successfully caught, the monster's heart had to be carefully cooked by a pure virgin without any disturbance whatsoever. So once the queen ate the cooked heart, she would immediately become pregnant. The next day, the king prepared everything to complete his mission, which was to find the monster that was now in one of the rivers. Once he was at the bottom, the king took this opportunity to attack the monster while it appeared to be sleeping. In that battle, the king had to die after suffering severe injuries. His heart was then taken and carried away by the queen. Inside the palace, the monster's heart was given to a servant who was still a virgin, and she was instructed to cook it immediately in a closed room. Now, while she was cooking, the servant suddenly felt that something strange was happening inside her body. Out of nowhere, she suddenly became pregnant after inhaling the steam from the dish. On the other hand, the queen, who also ate the heart, eventually became pregnant after some time. The queen's son was named Elias, while the servant's son, who was born on the same day, was named Jonah. 16 years later, both boys had grown into teenagers. The queen was overjoyed to see her son Elias grow into a young man. However, because both boys were born on the same day and from the same source, they ended up looking very much alike. The two of them had become good friends, often played together, and both also had the ability to breathe underwater. But even so, the queen apparently did not approve of their friendship, and she told her son that as a prince, Elias could not be friends with Jonah, who was the son of a servant. The queen also warned her servant to keep her child away from the prince, and if it ever happened again, she would not hesitate to expel the servant along with her child. From that moment on, things began to go just as the queen had hoped. However, one day, Jonah was caught meeting with Elias and wearing his clothes. Realizing that their resemblance could one day destroy her kingdom, the angry queen decided to expel Jonah. When Elias found out, he tried to stop his friend, but since he couldn't, Jonah ended up telling Elias something. Using the root of a large tree, Jonah stabbed it with his knife, causing water to start flowing from the root. Jonah then told Elias that the flowing water symbolized his life. If the water was clear, it meant Jonah was still alive. If the water turned muddy, it meant Jonah was in danger, and if the water stopped flowing, it meant he had died. After Jonah left, every day Elias would check the water flowing from the roots of that tree to make sure it was still clear or not. Then, one day, the water turned murky, which made Elias realize that Jonah might be in danger. Not long after, the queen was informed by her servant that the prince had apparently disappeared. Meanwhile, during his search, Elias finally managed to find the house where Jonah was living, and it turned out that Jonah had married a young woman. Everyone there believed that he was Jonah. However, after pretending to be Jonah, it was then revealed that Jonah had actually disappeared into the forest 5 days ago. Meanwhile, at the palace, the queen, who was extremely worried and had no other options, summoned the mysterious man who had once granted her wish. This time, the queen asked for her child to be brought back to the palace. However, it turned out that nothing came for free because there was a price to be paid to make it happen. On the other hand, Jonah, who had been missing all this time, was actually in a cave after falling into a deep ravine. While he was desperately shouting for urgent help, he was suddenly and violently attacked by a monstrous winged creature that aggressively tried to kill him. Fortunately, Elias, who happened to be looking for him, heard Jonah's screams and quickly found him, helping him escape from the creature. Elias managed to kill the creature when it tried to attack Jonah. But behind his heroic act, Elias actually didn't know that the creature he had just killed was his own mother, which was actually part of an agreement between the queen and the mysterious man. As explicitly stated in the previous binding agreement, to successfully bring back just one life, a significant sacrifice is absolutely required. The second intriguing story is about a powerful king, specifically named Strongcliff, and two elderly, wise women. King Cliff was a notoriously lecherous king, and his entire life was perpetually filled with an insatiable lust and desire. He had power and everything he needed just to choose any woman he desired. But up until now, he still hasn't found the right woman to marry. Meanwhile, two sisters named Ima and Dora lived near the palace. Both of them were old spinsters who were already quite advanced in age, and they rarely ever left the house. But even though they were old, they had beautiful voices, just like young maidens. One morning, King Cliff, who had just woken up, heard someone singing in one of the villagers' houses.
Who sings with such a beautiful voice? Where have you been hiding all this time?
Enchanted by the voice, the king then came to meet her. Dora, who had been singing earlier, then approached the door after they heard the king's voice knocking on the house door. In his mind, King Cliff kept imagining the figure of a beautiful woman behind the wall that separated them, not knowing that Dora and Ima were actually confused as well because if they revealed themselves, the king would likely be angry after seeing what they really looked like. After thinking for a moment, they finally decided to come up with a plan. Dora asked the king to come back next week, saying she needed time to prepare everything. From there, the two of them tried to find a way to make their fingers look like those of a young woman. Dora made some kind of potion and applied it to her fingers, but the result was still the same. Meanwhile, Ima chose to put her finger in her mouth for days, and the result was unexpected. Her finger now looked young again. A week later, the king finally came to visit. When Dora found out, she immediately presented Ima's finger, claiming it was her own. The king, upon seeing it, became absolutely overjoyed, and immediately and eagerly kissed the delicate finger, truly thinking he had finally found his one true love. However, since both women were worried that the king might eventually discover the truth, Dora proposed another condition. She would only sleep with the king if the room was completely dark. Hearing this, the king agreed. The next day, before the meeting, Ima helped Dora patch up her body with wax, so that when touched, her skin would feel smooth. Once they were done, Dora then went to the palace that the king had prepared, with the room in complete darkness. Long story short, the next morning, King Cliff suddenly became hysterical after realizing that he had spent the night with an old woman. Annoyed, the king then ordered his guards to throw Dora out the window, but fortunately, the old woman managed to survive and landed in the middle of the forest. Not long after, a witch who happened to be passing by found Dora hanging from the trees. After helping her down, the witch actually transformed Dora into a beautiful young woman with long red hair. The next day, while the king was out hunting with his men, he accidentally spotted Dora. Since he was a lecherous king, he ended up taking her to the palace and decided to make her his queen. Even though Dora didn't know how she had become young like this, she never forgot about her sister, Ima. Because of that, Dora then invited Ima to her wedding. So, when Ima arrived at the palace, she didn't expect that Dora had really changed. Curious, Ima then asked how Dora could become young again. Dora then replied that she also didn't really know for sure what had changed her skin. After the party was over, a quarrel broke out between the sisters, caused by Dora, who rejected Ima's presence in the palace because she thought it could arouse suspicion. Before leaving, an emotional Ima asked one last time about how Dora could become young again. In a loud and careless tone, Dora then answered that her body had been skinned. Then once outside, Ima, who believed that Dora's body had really been skinned, decided to visit a blacksmith and asked him to skin her in exchange for a sum of money. The blacksmith, who must have been either stupid or something, agreed and took Ima to the forest, tied her to a tree, and removed all her skin. After it was done, Ima, who now looked like a zombie, intended to return to the palace. But unfortunately, with such severe wounds, she collapsed and eventually died. Meanwhile, the miracle that had kept Dora looking young all this time did not last, as her skin has now started to wrinkle again. Realizing this profound truth, Dora then firmly decided to run away from the opulent palace and vowed never to return to its confines again. Now, the third story is about a very strange king. He has a daughter named Violet, while his wife has long since passed away. Even though he had a daughter, the king never truly loved her as his own child. One day, while the king was watching a performance put on by Violet, he accidentally noticed a flea trying to suck blood from his hand. Instead of paying attention to or even praising his daughter's performance, the king was more focused on catching the insect.
La 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 la.
From there, the king then returned to his chamber, where he placed the insect he had caught earlier into a jar and let it feed on his blood every day. As time went by, Violet, who continued to grow into a young woman, now tried to persuade her father to find her a suitor. But it seemed that the king didn't really care much about his daughter, as he was actually more concerned with his pet, which had now grown large.
Yeah. Hello? Yeah.
Sometime later, the king found that his pet had suddenly fallen ill. A personal doctor was then summoned and asked to treat the animal. However, since the doctor was unable to cure it, the animal eventually died. With the death of his pet, the king now had time to find a suitor for his daughter. So now the king intended to hold a competition where anyone would be given the chance to guess what animal skin would be used as the object of the contest. News of the competition then spread throughout the kingdom. From there, the king and his men welcomed the young men who came, showing them an animal skin, which turned out to be from the king's pet louse that had been skinned. Several people tried to guess, but none of them managed to answer correctly. After all, who would have known that it was louse skin? But not long after, a strange giant creature appeared and joined the competition. Everyone, including Violet, was utterly shocked. However, since this competition had no requirements, the giant was eventually allowed to make a guess.
Flee.
What?
Flee.
Yes, he managed to do it. Violet, who found out about it, was immediately shocked and saddened. She then went up to the palace rooftop intending to commit suicide. The king, who followed her, then apologized to his daughter because he never expected that someone would actually be able to guess it. The king also added that he never intended to give Violet to someone he called a monster because of his enormous size. However, even so, the king could not take back his words. He then, in a stern tone, told Violet to come down and accept everything that had happened. After diligently obeying everything her stern father commanded, the monstrous creature then took young Violet away toward the towering mountains, where she would subsequently stay for several days. One day, while the monster was out hunting, Violet happened to see a woman on the other side of the mountain. Sensing an opportunity, Violet tried to ask the woman for help, but since the woman didn't know how to help her, she promised to return the next day.
Trust me. We'll come back tomorrow. No, not tomorrow. I can't wait until...
Then, the very next day, the woman actually kept her important promise and, as expected, came with her entire family, just as she had said she would. But unfortunately, while they were helping Violet cross, the giant suddenly appeared and caught them. Fortunately, they all managed to cut the rope just after Violet was saved. From there, Violet and the family then left the mountains together. But they hadn't gone far when suddenly the giant appeared again, and this time he killed every member of the family one by one, before finally chasing Violet into a cave. Because she had no other choice, Violet pretended to surrender and acted as if she regretted all her actions. But as soon as things calmed down, Violet quickly finished off the creature. From there, Violet then returned to the palace, carrying the giant human head with her. Violet deliberately showed it to her father, so that everyone would know that this was the husband her father himself had chosen. From that moment on, the king, who regretted all his actions, appointed Violet as the new queen of his kingdom. At the celebration, several invited guests arrived, including King Elias and King Cliff, along with Dora, before eventually Dora returned to her original form. And that was the storyline of the film Tale of Tales, which was released in 2015. So, out of the 3 stories, which one do you find the most interesting? Alright then, that's all for our story today. Thank you to everyone who has watched, and see you again next time. Bye!